There is a moment in every life when generosity stops feeling noble and starts feeling expensive. It doesn't happen loudly. There is no announcement, no warning bell. It happens quietly in the space between a promise you made to help and the sinking realization that you are the only one paying the cost. Machiavelli understood this moment centuries ago, not as a philosopher writing from comfort, but as a man watching power destroy those who confused mercy with wisdom. And his lesson was not gentle. It was not comforting. It was ruthless, because reality is ruthless. He warned that there are certain people you should never try to save, not because they don't deserve help, but because saving them will slowly dismantle you from the inside while they walk away unchanged. Imagine standing in a dark room with a single candle. That candle is your energy, your time, your emotional capacity, your focus. Every time you try to rescue the wrong person, you tilt that candle toward them, believing the flame will warm them, guide them, maybe even transform them. But some people don't warm themselves by your fire. They let it burn down until there is nothing left but smoke and wax on your hands. Machiavelli saw this pattern repeat itself in courts, alliances, friendships, and wars. He watched rulers fall not because they were cruel, but because they were compassionate toward those who weaponized that compassion. There is a particular kind of person who always appears wounded when you meet them. Their story is heavy, detailed, and endlessly unfinished. They speak of betrayal, of unfairness, of a world that never gave them a chance. At first, your heart opens. You listen, you empathize, you offer support, advice, resources, sometimes even your reputation. And every time you do, they seem grateful in the moment, but nothing ever changes. Their circumstances remain frozen, not because they can't move forward, but because their suffering has become their identity. Machiavelli would say this person is not seeking salvation. They are seeking an audience. And the more you try to save them, the more invested you become in a story that was never meant to end. Your energy disappears into a bottomless pit, and one day you realize you have spent years trying to heal someone who has no intention of being whole. Then there is the person who smiles while taking from you. They do not look desperate or broken. They look charming, capable, even generous in appearance. They borrow your time, your ideas, your connections, and they promise that it's temporary, that they just need a little help to get back on their feet. But every step forward they take is powered by something they quietly took from you. Machiavelli understood this type deeply because they often sat close to power. These are the people who never ask outright. They position themselves so that you offer, and when you finally need something in return, they are suddenly unavailable, distracted, or offended that you would even ask. Saving them feels like partnership until you realize you have been slowly financing your own irrelevance. There is another figure Machiavelli warned about, and this one is more dangerous because they don't look like a burden at all. They look loyal. They stand beside you in public. They praise you in front of others. They repeat your words with admiration. But privately, they resist your growth. Every time you try to evolve, to change, to step into a stronger version of yourself, they subtly pull you back to who you used to be, not with insults, but with concern, not with opposition, but with doubt. They remind you of your past mistakes, your limitations, the risks of trying something new. They don't want you to fail, but they don't want you to outgrow them either. Machiavelli would say this is a person who benefits from your stagnation. Saving them means staying small enough to remain familiar, and over time you begin to confuse loyalty with self-betrayal. Some people do not drain you openly. They exhaust you through chaos. Their lives are a constant emergency. There is always a crisis, always a fire that needs immediate attention, always a dramatic collapse that only you seem capable of fixing. When things are calm, they create turbulence because peace offers them nothing. You become addicted to being needed, to being the hero who steps in just in time. Machiavelli saw how leaders were destroyed by this dynamic, how they spent their strength managing internal chaos while their real enemies grew stronger outside the gates. Saving someone like this does not bring stability. It teaches them that disorder is rewarded with attention, and slowly your own life begins to mirror their unrest. Then there is the one who envies you even as they accept your help. This envy is quiet, almost invisible, but it leaks out in small moments, in backhanded compliments, in jokes that sting just a little too much, in their inability to genuinely celebrate your success. Machiavelli understood envy as one of the most corrosive forces in human relationships. When you save someone who secretly resents you, you are feeding attention that will eventually turn against you. Your kindness becomes evidence of their inferiority, and instead of gratitude, it breeds hostility. One day, often when you least expect it, they will undermine you not because you harmed them, but because you reminded them of what they could not become. And finally, there is the person who refuses responsibility entirely, not just for their failures, but for their choices. Everything that goes wrong in their life is someone else's fault, some system's fault, some invisible enemy's fault. When you step in to help, you also step in to absorb blame. If things improve, it was their strength. If things fall apart, it was your mistake. Machiavelli would tell you that power cannot survive in the hands of those who protect the irresponsible because accountability is the foundation of strength. Saving someone who refuses responsibility means accepting a future where you are always guilty and never respected. What makes these lessons uncomfortable is that Machiavelli never framed them as moral judgments. He didn't say these people were evil. He said they were predictable, and in his worldview, predictability was more important than intention. A prince who saves the wrong people out of kindness eventually loses the loyalty of the right ones. A leader who bleeds for those who exploit mercy teaches others that manipulation is more effective than merit. And an individual who sacrifices themselves endlessly for people who never change slowly loses the capacity to protect what truly matters. There is a quiet grief that comes with realizing you cannot save everyone. It feels like a failure at first, like a betrayal of your better nature. But Machiavelli would argue that discernment is not cruelty, it is survival. Mercy without judgment is not virtue, it is negligence. And the hardest part of this lesson is not walking away from others, but accepting that some people can only be saved by consequences, not compassion. As the candle burns lower, you begin to understand that your responsibility is not to keep everyone warm, but to ensure the flame survives. Because without it, you cannot help anyone at all. And the world does not need more martyrs who disappear quietly under the weight of misplaced loyalty. It needs individuals who know when to extend a hand and when to let go, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Machiavelli's lesson endures because it speaks to a truth we often refuse to face, that power, whether personal or political, is not maintained by endless giving, but by intelligent restraint. And once you see this pattern, once you feel the difference between generosity that builds and generosity that erodes, you can never unsee it again. You begin to move differently. You listen more carefully. You help with intention, not obligation. And in doing so, you protect not only yourself, but the future version of you that would have been lost trying to save the wrong people. Once you accept this truth, something subtle but irreversible shifts inside you. You begin to notice how often guilt has been used as a leash, how frequently kindness has been mistaken for access, how easily your silence was interpreted as permission. Machiavelli never asked people to become cold. He asked them to become awake, and awakening is rarely comfortable. It forces you to revisit memories you once romanticized, moments you called loyalty that were actually fear of abandonment, sacrifices you praised because admitting they were mistakes would hurt too much. Yet this reckoning is where strength is born, not in the loud rejection of others, but in the quiet reclamation of yourself. There is a strange loneliness that arrives when you stop trying to save everyone. The phone rings less, the emergencies diminish, the emotional noise fades. At first, the silence feels empty, almost wrong, as if you've done something selfish by no longer being constantly available. But over time, you realize that what you mistook for connection was often dependency, and what you mistook for purpose was often distraction. Machiavelli understood that power requires solitude at times because clarity cannot survive in constant chaos. When you step back, you finally hear your own thoughts again, and they sound different now, steadier, less desperate to be needed. You start to recognize that true help has a boundary, and that boundary is consent to change. Without it, every rescue becomes a rehearsal of the same tragedy. This is why Machiavelli believed that mercy must be strategic, not sentimental. He saw rulers ruined by emotional decisions is made in the heat of empathy, decisions that felt right in the moment but weakened their position irreparably. And while most of us are not princes or kings, we rule our own lives in quieter ways. Our time is our territory. Our energy is our army. Our attention is our treasury. Hand them to the wrong people, and you will eventually be conquered from within. There is also a deeper, more uncomfortable realization that emerges. Some of the people you tried to save never asked you to. You volunteered. You stepped in uninvited, driven by a need to feel valuable, irreplaceable, essential. Machiavelli would say that this is where ego disguises itself as virtue. When you rescue someone who has not chosen growth, you are not empowering them. You are asserting control, even if unconsciously, and control when resisted turns into resentment. This is why so many saviors eventually feel unappreciated. They gave help that was never requested and expected gratitude that was never promised. As you move forward with this understanding, you become more selective, not just with others, but with yourself. You ask harder questions before offering support. Is this person willing to change or only willing to complain? Are they taking responsibility or outsourcing it to me? Does my help strengthen them or does it replace their effort? These questions are not cruel. They are clarifying, and clarity is what separates sustainable generosity from self-destruction. Machiavelli's critics often accuse him of promoting heartlessness, but this misses the point entirely. His philosophy was not about abandoning humanity. It was about understanding it. He knew that people are not transformed by kindness alone, and that unchecked mercy can invite exploitation. He also knew that the world does not reward those who exhaust themselves for ungrateful causes. It rewards those who survive long enough to make a difference where it actually matters. There is a particular kind of peace that settles in when you stop fighting battles that were never yours. You no longer feel responsible for fixing every broken story that crosses your path. You learn to sit with the discomfort of letting others face the consequences of their choices. And in that discomfort, something remarkable happens. Respect grows. Not always immediately, and not always from the people you hoped for, but from those who recognize strength when they see it, even from yourself. Over time, you begin to notice that the right people respond differently to boundaries. They don't push back, they don't manipulate, they don't dramatize your absence. They adjust, they respect, they step up. And this is how you know the difference between someone who needed saving and someone who needed accountability. Machiavelli believed that alliances built on strength endure, while those built on pity collapse under pressure. The same is true in personal life. Relationships rooted in mutual responsibility grow deeper when tested, while those built on rescue disintegrate the moment you stop carrying the weight. Perhaps the most liberating part of this lesson is realizing that walking away is not an act of violence. It is an act of alignment. You are aligning your actions with reality instead of hope. You are choosing long-term stability over short-term emotional relief. You are preserving the flame instead of scattering sparks into the dark. And once you make this choice, you stop explaining yourself so much. You no longer feel the need to justify why you cannot save everyone. You simply understand that you were never meant to. Machiavelli's ruthless lesson endures because it does not flatter us. It strips away comforting illusions and leaves us with responsibility. Responsibility for where we invest our compassion. Responsibility for who we empower with our presence. Responsibility for protecting the parts of ourselves that allow us to endure. And in a world that constantly demands more, faster, louder, this restraint becomes a quiet form of power. In the end, the question is not whether you are capable of saving others. Most people are. The question is whether you are wise enough to know when not to. Because every life is shaped not only by who we help, but by who we stop trying to rescue. And once you understand this, you no longer see Machiavelli's lesson as ruthless. You see it as honest. And honesty, though sharp, is often the only thing that truly sets us free.